I had to giggle a little bit. Kevin came over and patted me on the hand and giggled like I did it. We're glad that taking the initiative to do that for us. Saying goodbye is something we do all the time, by the way. It's not a one-time goodbye. We often think that saying goodbye is a one-time event. And I've been telling you over the last 3 weeks in this Acts chapter 20 passage where Paul is saying goodbye for a final time. He's leaving Ephesus. He's not going to come back to Ephesus. He really anticipates that he's going to be put to death. And so he really doesn't anticipate ever seeing his friends in Ephesus again. And he prepares them for that and says goodbye to them. But goodbyes are not as final as that. For example, those of you that are parents and have been parents for a while, do you remember that first preschool trip? When you took the child either to preschool or kindergarten for the very first time? That goodbye was traumatic. All of us have gone through that. I remember taking Heather to the preschool. Jan and I both worked, and my job, I got up every morning. I took Heather across the street where the church was. My church secretary did her hair every morning, and then I would take her to Paula's Playhouse, the preschool. The first time that I did that, it was traumatic. Heather didn't seem to mind, but I was in sheer panic. I was leaving my one and only first daughter with people that I had just met. We walked in. Heather scurried into the room. There were toys. There were things. She didn't even know that I existed. And I'm leaving going, bye. Nothing. I even went outside and looked in the window. I was one of those guys, you know. Is she okay? Is it going to be all right? When Courtney went to school, kindergarten for the first time, we had to walk her in because she was so insecure. I had to park the car, take her by the hand, not like other carpool people that just pulled up and kids jumped down and went in. I had to take Courtney by the hand, and we would go inside. I did that for about a week, and then finally she realized it was safe, and instead of giving me a hug, she just ran off into the kindergarten class and left me standing in the hallway. And I was going, bye. We all know that, don't we? How about when that kid first went to college? Or better yet, when the last one went to college? Some of you are saying, not there yet. You will be. You're going to be in that situation where you're going to think that they're moving to the other side of the planet. And you're going to feel loss, and you're going to feel grief, and you're going to feel like goodbye is such a final thing. Some of you are to this goodbye, but some this will be in the future. But have you ever had to say goodbye to a spouse? You've lived together a long time. Disease has come. Something has taken them out of your world. I've watched many of a spouse standing at a casket struggling with how do you say goodbye. Saying goodbye is a difficult thing, and yet there are some things that we can do to prepare ourselves for every one of these kinds of goodbyes. Now, I'm going to read a text that I read last week as part of last week's sermon, but I want to go into a little bit deeper of some things that he said there. So go with me to Acts chapter 20, verse 32. And now I commend you to God and to the word of his grace, which is able to build you up and to give you the inheritance among all those who are sanctified. I have coveted no one's silver or gold or clothes. You yourselves know that these hands ministered to my own needs and to the men who were with me. In everything I showed you that by working hard in this manner, you must help the weak, and remember the words of the Lord Jesus Christ, that he himself said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. And when he had said these things, he knelt down and prayed with them all. And they began to weep aloud and embraced Paul and repeatedly kissed him, grieving especially over the word which he had spoken, that they would not see his face again. And they were accompanying him to to the ship. You get down there to verse 37, that's kind of that traumatic moment where saying goodbye is now a reality. They're crying, they're grieving, they're embracing, they're walking with him to the ship that he's going to get on. The ship's going to sail away. And they are all pretty confident that they're not going to see his face ever again. Those moments come in life. It is best that we prepare for those moments than to let those moments catch us off guard. Sometimes those goodbyes are prepared for, and we know that they're coming, and they're kind of gradual. For example, we all know that a child is going to leave home and go to college. They've made an application, they've been accepted, they've chosen a school, they've packed their bags, they've got everything ready to go. And during that process, at least me as a father, I was preparing for that moment. You know, every time that I would carry a suitcase down and put it in the car, I was preparing myself for that moment. There was that moment when we drove to the school and you unloaded all those suitcases and you knew that you're leaving your oldest daughter or your last daughter there, and you're prepared for it, you are geared for it until you have to say goodbye. And then it's tears and embracing and weeping and all of these things that Paul's friends experienced. How do we prepare for those moments? I want to give you 3 things that I believe prepare us even for when we say our goodbye in death. I would hope that all of us would have the experience of being able to prepare for that and to be able to say our goodbyes to our family even when death comes. But there are going to be a lot of goodbyes that are going to come in between that if we're prepared for them, we sometimes take the edge off. I'm going to be speaking especially to those folks who have acknowledged that Christ is a part of their lives. When a person acknowledges that Christ is a part of their lives, they take on a different set of priorities and they take on a different set of theological concepts. For example, for me, saying goodbye in death is not a final kind of thing. I believe in an afterlife. I believe in an eternity. I believe that I can go to where my loved ones who have died have gone. I believe that I will see them again someday. So when I think about the finality of death, I'm not doing so as one, as Paul would say, who has no hope. Those who do not believe that there is an eternity, or those that do not believe that God has a place prepared for us. I'm preparing today, or I'm speaking especially to those who are followers of Christ. First and foremost, I want you to read verse 32. And now I commend you to God and to the word of his grace, which is able to build you up and give you the inheritance among all those who are sanctified. This idea of commending you, I commend you to God. The word commend has this idea of laying something alongside something else. So what Paul's saying is, I've been responsible for you, I've been teaching you, I've been leading you, but now I am laying you or putting you next to God. Have you ever heard someone say, I'm putting you in the hands of God? Or I'm putting that situation in God's hands. That's exactly what Paul's saying. From here on out, I am commending you, or I am turning you over to God, who is going to give you Christian growth. Our growth as people, our growth as Christians, do not come from our reaching certain levels in our lives. We grow from inside out. We grow as God prospers in our lives, as God becomes more a part of our lives. We should be more mature today than what we were yesterday. Paul in another passage describes Christians as people that he would love to give a steak and baked potato to. But they're not quite ready for that because they're still infants drinking milk from a bottle. Have you ever known somebody that just never grew up? They grew up physically. They look older, but mentally they're still just immature. In our Christian walk, we have a lot of folks that make commitments to walk with Christ and never internally grow. They never mature in that. They never get to the place where that becomes a dominant part of their character. And because of that, they're immature when it comes time to face mature situations. They're still not prepared for that which is yet to come. If I'm going to prepare for my goodbyes and prepare for what's out ahead of me, I want to do that with as much maturity as I possibly can. How many of you moved away from home and went to college? When I say moved away from home, you moved, how many of you moved more than 10 miles away from home? But go, okay. How many of you went to a whole other state? How many of you couldn't wait to get there? You and me, we'll talk later. I moved from Michigan to South Carolina. I had graduated high school. I was 17 years old. I had a 10-speed bicycle. That was my only transportation. My mom and dad strapped that sucker to the back of that Chevrolet Caprice that we own. We drove the 700-plus miles from Detroit, Michigan, all the way to Charleston, South Carolina, and I promise you, the only person that I knew in the whole state of South Carolina was me. Really. I didn't have any relatives here. I didn't have any friends in South Carolina, and when my mom and dad took that 10-speed bike off the back of that car, and they couldn't do it fast enough, here's your bike, we're gone. Zoom! And off they drove. And I'm looking at the taillights and I'm thinking, am I ready for this? I mean, 700 miles away from home. I don't know anybody. I'm 17 years old, and boy, I was proud of my 10-speed bike. Was I mature enough to handle that? Had I matured in my life to the stage that I could deal with everything that was going to come with that? I had grown in my faith enough to believe that God had called me to that school. I had matured enough in my faith that I believed that God had a future for me and that that future was going through this experience. I had a faith that believed that there were people that I just hadn't met yet that were going to become my family, that were going to become my friends. There was a maturity about me that said, I may not see it now, but I have trusted God many times with blind steps into darkness that I can trust him with this one. It was difficult because Baptist College at Charleston at that time was a commuting school, which meant at Friday at 3 o'clock, the only person on campus was me. Me and the guys from Kenya. We became good friends. The three of them and myself were the only ones, and the school cafeteria had to open on Saturday and Sunday because we were there. Not sure that I trusted that food all the time. Those people had to come in, they had to prepare a meal because I had paid for the school plan that included the weekend. And so every now and then on a Saturday, I'd walk through the line and I was the only person that would show up that day. And I would get glared at as they slapped the mashed potatoes onto my plate. There were those times when I sit in my room alone thinking, have I made the right choice? Am I mature enough to handle this? And one by one, God began to send friends. He began to commend people to me. He began to bring people that were going to teach me and take me to the very next steps of the journeys. Saying goodbye to my parents was one thing, but it opened up the door to say hello to people that I just had never met before in my life, who became my family, became my friends. One of them is Bud Summers. Bud Summers passed away not too long ago. He was our minister of education at First Baptist Walterboro. He and I were friends. He was one of the very first persons that said, are you staying here on the weekend by yourself? And I said, yes. He said, why don't you go home with me? I live in James Island. So I started going home with him on the weekend. It wasn't long before I met a long blonde-haired girl. And that blonde-headed girl owned a car. A Ford. I found her very attractive. She had the three things that I needed in life more than anything else at that stage in my life. I needed a car. She had a mother who could cook. And they had a washing machine. Now that became the grounds for mine and Jan's relationship. We would take her car that had no air conditioning in it, but we could roll down the windows, go 60 miles an hour, and it could be cool in that car, and we could talk and move on. I built a relationship that ended up into my marriage. Are you following what I'm saying? Maturity sometimes means saying goodbye to something so that you can open the doors and say hello to something else. Maturity says, don't hold on to the things that are in the past, but go forward to the things that God is leading you in. Be confident that God has a purpose in your life. Be confident that when you say goodbye to one thing, God is opening doors and saying hello to others. Being confident means that God has an intent to grow you from the inside out. Look at verse 33. I have coveted no one's silver or gold or clothes. You yourselves know that these hands ministered to my own needs. Paul, by the way, was a tent maker. He made tents to make his living. And he also did that with people who traveled with him. And everything I showed you that by working hard in this manner, you must help the weak and remember the words of the Lord Jesus, that he himself said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. Saying goodbyes also inspires us to become Christian in our giving. Now, I want you to understand what I'm talking about. Saying goodbye sometimes, I don't know if you've realized it or not, and I've said this here on several occasions, I have yet to see a hearse with a U-Haul trailer tacked to it. I mean, I've been to a lot of funerals. I've never seen anyone taking it with them. And those who have tried, it always ends up somewhere that it shouldn't ought to be. Part of maturing and understanding and saying our goodbyes is also becoming generous in our giving. Remember, it's more important that you give than it is to receive. Jesus on more than one occasion reminded us that if we had 2 coats and our brother had none, we were to give him one of ours. He's reminded us on several occasions that when we walk past somebody who is begging for alms, we should give. He reminded us on many occasions that when we hoard, that we become selfish and greedy, and we're not quite ready to say our goodbye. My mother was not quite ready to say her goodbye. My mother had hoarded stuff and put stuff away, and part of the dismay at her death for me was going through her stuff and just hurting. I would find clothing that still had tags on them that somebody could have been wearing that she had put in a box and in an attic somewhere. There were things that had never been opened that somebody could have used and somebody could have taken care of, and yet there was a problem for her to say, I got to hold on to this. I'm not quite ready to say goodbye to my stuff. Let me say something to you that as a Christian, our stuff should be secondary to our generosity. That we should learn that it's more blessed to give than it is to receive, and that we should be looking for opportunities to give away the things that God has blessed us with. Don't wait till the end of your life and then try to write it down on a piece of paper that says, so-and-so should get so-and-so in my life. Jan's mother, I love her to death. She spent 3 weeks with us, but she's got tags on the back of all of her furniture with people's names as to who should get it when they die. I asked her not long ago if I could go ahead and get mine. No. I thought I can use it now. No. But it would look so, no. I'm going to hold on to it. But when I'm dead, I've made the preparations to give this to you. Isn't that interesting? Have you ever thought about what you're holding on to that you really don't need? Have you ever thought about the stuff that you tie yourself to knowing that you can't take it with you? And do you understand what I'm saying? It's those things that sometimes takes us away from the opportunity of being generous and the opportunity to give and the opportunity to minister. I love what Kevin said a few moments ago. We're here to serve. We're here to serve people. And part of that is that we give. And part of that is that we don't hold on to the things that when we're gone are not going to matter all that much. Jan and I are cleaning out our bedroom, and we got a new bed, and we did some painting, and I reached underneath and pulled out a box of some of my mom's old jewelry. It had been pushed under the bed. We had not gone through that box, and Jan and I sat down and started going through all of these things that were in these boxes. There were watches, not expensive watches, really, really cheap watches, to be honest with you, but she couldn't throw them away, so she put them in a box. There were pens, and some of those pens were important. One of them was a Michigan pen that Dale, when he went to the University of Michigan, he just couldn't throw it away, so he put it in a box. There were stick pins that Dale's mother used to wear on her dresses. Not expensive jewelry, but just really cheap jewelry that were in a box. In another box, underneath my bed. I wonder how many of us take not just sentimental things, but things that really could be better suited somewhere else. And we put them in a box, put it in another box, and then we slide it under our bed. I'm wondering if we have learned, as Paul reminded, take care of yourself. I make tents to provide for my living, but once I have provided for my living, it is important that I help the weak. And remember the words of Jesus, it is more blessed to give than to receive. I hope that when it comes time for my final goodbye, that I've given away everything that I own. I hope that I've passed that to someone who needs it and someone who can use it. On my driver's license, there's a little sticker that says I'm an organ donor. At one time, that meant something. This past time when I renewed my driver's license and I said to the lady, I would like to be an organ donor, she looked at me as if to say, who wants it? You know, who would benefit from it? And yet there was a part of me that said, if someone can use the corneas of my eyes, if someone can use tissue, if someone can use a kidney, if someone can use a part of a liver, is this not the ultimate way of being generous? Is this not the ultimate of giving to the weak? Is this not the ultimate of realizing that everything that we have has been given to us by God, and that there's nothing wrong with handing that to other people? A mature Christian prepares for their death by giving away as much as they can. And then last but not least, we realize that a mature Christian is soothed by their Christianity in their grief. Look, verse 36. When he had said these things, he knelt down and prayed with them all. They began to weep aloud and embraced Paul and repeatedly kissed him, grieving especially over the word which he had spoken, that they would not see his face again, and they were accompanying him to the ship. I want to say to you today that I've watched many people come to the ends of their lives, and I've watched many people who have dealt with the death of loved ones in their lives, and there are two very distinct approaches to that. One is for someone who has no hope, and their grief is painful, and it's difficult. But for those, as Paul says, who have a hope, there is something that's grieving proper. It's understanding the loss, it's understanding the sorrow, it's understanding the loneliness that comes with that, but there's also a hope that fills it full of joy. Every time that I come to a time of a funeral service, I begin the service by saying we are here today with two emotions. One of them is grief and sorrow, but the other is hope and joy. And somewhere during that funeral service, I will make reference to the fact that we're not here celebrating death and dying, but we're here celebrating life and living, that this casket and this body and these flowers do not represent an end, but we proclaim our faith that says there's life everlasting. And I usually like to say to folks, as you enter into your grief, be led by this hope. Martin Luther, the great reformer, used to say, the very things that we try to hold on to are the very things that we lose, but the things that we turn loose of are the very things that we keep. When we turn loose of a loved one in death, we grieve the loss, but we realize that we're putting them in the hands of God who's prepared eternity for them. When I began to think about my mother's death a 5 years ago, my mother died 2 years before she died. Alzheimer's had taken a toll. And there were times when I would go to visit her, and sometimes I would just swing in for 10 minutes. Sometimes I'd spend an afternoon with her. But as I would walk in, sometimes she would know who I was, and sometimes she wouldn't. Sometimes she would be in Middlesboro, Kentucky, which is where she grew up as a child. Sometimes she would be in Detroit, Michigan, where I grew up as a child. It was always interesting because when I walked in, she would say, you know that little white house on the corner? And I knew she was in Middlesboro because there was a little white house that they owned on the corner. Sometimes she would say, let's go over to the produce stand, which was owned by her uncle. And I knew we were in Middlesboro, and so we could talk about Middlesboro, Kentucky. Sometimes in the middle of July, I would go and she'd say, how much snow did we get last night? And I knew we were in Detroit. And there was grief when I could look into the eyes of my mother and realize she wasn't there. There was grief realizing that the conversations that we once had are now in the past. There was grief when I could go in and we would joke about things and they no longer were funny. There was grief when I went in and we would hear the same story that we had heard over and over again. There was grief when I watched as her body began to deteriorate and age and Alzheimer's began to take its toll. There was grief when we went to the doctor and the doctor said, I'm afraid there's not much more that we can do. There was grief when we put her into hospice. There was grief when I would walk in and I would see that it was a shell of my mother. I believe God gave us a moment of hope and clarity when on one particular day I was bending over her bed, we were listening to some music and her eyes opened, and for a few moments I believe she saw me and I saw her. And I believe God was saying, don't worry, I've got this. That's what I walked away with. Don't worry, I got this. It wasn't too many days thereafter that my mother passed away. The people around me were thoroughly confused because I rejoiced in her death. I had been praying for her healing, and healing had come. I had prayed for that which she had hoped for all of her life had now become a reality. And the people at the nursing facility and the memory care unit could not understand that I wasn't weeping and crying and showing all that. It's because I had already grieved that. Now I was celebrating the hope that I had. You see, as we come to the end of our lives, I hope that we're not coming to the end of our lives grieving that which we don't have, but rather celebrating what we do have. I believe that when we say our goodbyes one to each other, whether it's nothing more than a child going to college or saying goodbye to a spouse, or maybe even coming to the moment when our life is coming to an end and we're saying goodbye to our families, I hope that we're not coming there still grieving. I hope that we've resolved the issue of grief so that we are coming there celebrating as Christians, and as only as Christians can do. Do not. And if you do, I'll come back to haunt you. Do not roll my dead carcass to the front of this church and walk by and say, my, don't he look natural? I am considering being embalmed with one eye open so I can see who comes. Don't do that to me. You will defeat everything that I've ever stood for You will defeat every sermon that I've ever preached. You will defeat everything that I believe. If you pick up the newspaper one day and you read that Steve Brown is dead, it's a lie. My body may cease to be, but the scripture says, those who believe in me shall never die. Celebrate that. You may grieve a loss, but grieve that loss before I'm gone. Once I'm gone, celebrate. Sing my favorite songs. Tell some good stories. Laugh, cry, celebrate the moment, but don't ever, ever think that death is an ending for me. It is the beginning of life as only God can give it. Celebrate that. I hope that you can say that to your family. Tanya Tucker won an award this year. Did you know that? She's been around a long time. Do you know what her song was? Bring my flowers now. Don't wait till I'm dead to bring flowers to me. Bring my flowers now. Celebrate life now. Because once I'm gone, it's too late to do those things. Grieve now. Understand that life has its goodbyes. Prepare for those goodbyes. Get yourself in a frame of mind that you leave your family celebrating and that your family celebrates your life. Don't negate your life by the way you say goodbye. If you believe in something, take it to the final goodbye. Leave the world with a testimony that says, what I lived, what I taught, what I believed is as real at the end as it was at the beginning. Let's pray. Dear Father, we pray that you would remind us today that saying goodbye is a normal course of life. Paul was saying goodbye to his friends. He was going to be leaving, and Paul knew that maybe his life would be quickly coming to an end. And so he was saying to his friends, don't grieve, celebrate. Saying goodbye can be difficult, but when we prepare for it, it can be meaningful. We pray, Father, that we will have grown to maturity so that when it comes time to say goodbye, we do it not as immature children, but as those who have grown in faith. We pray, Father, that you would teach us that saying goodbye also means giving away stuff. It means saying goodbye to the things that we try to hold on to. And that saying goodbye should be a celebration of life and not a grieving of death. Well, we pray it in Christ's name and for his sake. Amen.
My guitar real quick so I don't kill everyone's ears.